Andy Warhol once famously said that everyone will one day have their 15 minutes of fame. Let me tell you about mine. Well, it really wasn't 15 minutes, more like 15 seconds, but nonetheless, there I was, right in the middle of it all. Elaine and I were staying in New York City, and as it happened, so were some good friends of ours from our local church. They were well-to-do business people and had quite an upmarket hotel right in the middle of town. Now, Elaine, with her amazing ability to find a bargain, had us staying just a couple of blocks away in a dog kennel-sized room. We did have a window with a view. Well, the view was just a brick wall and it was built just a couple of inches away from our window. Now, as it happened, the wife was celebrating her 50th birthday, and so her husband had pre-arranged with us to meet them at their hotel so we could go out and share a celebratory meal with them. That evening, we walked to their hotel, and just as we stepped into the lobby, a group of over 30 photographers and reporters who were standing off in the corner rushed toward us with a great excitement, clicking the cameras and had their microphones ready. Now, I have to say that Elaine and I were a little taken back. We didn't know what to do. We'd never seen anything quite like this before. We felt a little out of place anyway, being in this rather upmarket hotel, but to be encircled by paparazzi, well, that took it all to a higher experience than we'd ever had. Oh, did I tell you why we were mobbed? It's not because I was a Tom Cruise lookalike, although Elaine does have a bit of Nicole Kidman about her, but it happened that the media circus ran right past us, actually, to a limousine that had just pulled up right behind us. Obviously, the young lady who stepped out of that car was well known, although we didn't recognise her. Now, we did go on to have a lovely evening and celebration with our friends, and we had a great story to tell. Now, the story of Encounter Christian Fellowship has been told well over the last 10 or so weeks, as we've been reminded of the core values that we uphold as a church. They're great values and ideals that were put in place by those who established this church. Well done to those people, and thank you again to Paul for expounding them so well for us. During those 10 weeks, as we've been reminded of those values and the things that arise out of those values, there's a question that I would like to ask you. The question is, what core values do you personally have in your life? What are the values and standards that you apply to your life? And what are the principles which you live by? Do you aspire to treat everyone the same? Do you relish those moments when you're mobbed and everyone's excited because you're here? They're usually only fleeting moments anyway. Is life all about you? What are the values and standards that you apply to your life? The principles by which you live? Now, we know that God loves us more than we can even imagine. That's the good news. That's the gospel. Jesus died so that you and I can experience a full life through him. There was a time when some Pharisees came to Jesus and they asked him, "Lord, what is the most important commandment?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbour as yourself. The entire law, all of the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments." So it's not about what I can get out of life, it's rather about what I can give. Do you aspire to treat everyone exactly the same? Remember that the very first core value of ECF is that people are important. We've seen some unimaginable scenes emanating from the US over the past few days, following the tragic death of George Floyd. The situation's gone way beyond simply being a protest, and it would seem that many have grasped an opportunity to menace the community by rioting and looting. As I said the other day, everyone has an opinion, and very often the game blame has been played. So what is going on? It seems as though there is a tirade of evil happening before our eyes. Now, one of our personal values as followers of Jesus must be that people are important. The core values of Encounter Christian Fellowship begin with that statement. It should be the beginning of our own core value statement as well. Now, we may not always agree with everyone. Hey, that's all right. We're different people. But God loves us, so we should love others unconditionally. In fact, Jesus said in John 13:34-35, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this will all people know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." That doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone, but we are called to love them. That doesn't mean you have to be best friends with everyone, but it does mean that they must be treated with respect and dignity and honour. Jesus put it like this: "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." Do people see Jesus in your life? Is there a love flowing out of your heart for others? Do you treat others as you would like to be treated? The way that we live, along with the way that we love and respect others, even forgiving others, can set the scene ultimately for their salvation. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. It doesn't matter what talents or skills you may or may not have. God can use you to make a difference in your family, in ECF, and in the lives of people around you. Now, most of us know the story of Noah, the one man on the face of the earth who was still following God in a time when everyone else was walking away. Noah's story reminds us of what God can do through one person who is willing to be used by him to make a difference in the world. I want to look at Noah's story through some statements personally applied to us, each and every one. We can make a difference when we listen to God's voice. You see, God looked out over all the earth and he found only one man that he could relate to. The fall of God's creation began with the sin of Adam and Eve, and it continued to go downhill until righteousness was absent from the face of the earth. In Genesis 6, verses 5-8, we read, "God saw that human evil was out of control. People thought evil, imagined evil, evil from morning to night. God was sorry that he had made the human race in the first place. It broke his heart. God said, I'll get rid of my ruined creation, make a clean sweep. People, animals, snakes, bugs, birds, the works. I'm sorry I ever made them." But Noah was different. God liked what he saw in Noah. That's from the Message Bible. As God considered the sinfulness of people, he was looking for someone that he could count on to make a difference. God was going to destroy the world because of its evil, but he had not yet given up on people entirely. He needed just one person with whom he could work with whom he could begin again. And that one was Noah, the one person on all the earth who found favour with the Lord. Now, while all people were running away from God, Noah was ready and willing to hear God's voice and to act upon it. In fact, we read in Hebrews 11:7, it was by faith that Noah built an ark to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about something that had never happened before. A bit like the experience in Elaine and I had. It had never happened before. And so this flood had never happened before. God condemned the world, but this one man was made right in God's sight. I'm quite certain that God isn't calling any of us to build an ark so that we can repopulate the planet. But I know this, that God is calling each of us to make a difference in our world, just as Noah did. You and I will only make a difference in our families and in our church and in the lives of people around us, in our world, when we learn, like Noah, to hear the voice of God. When our core values, if you like, line up with God's heart. The author James Hamilton once wrote, "Before refrigerators, people used ice houses to preserve their food." Now, these ice houses had thick walls, no windows, brick walls maybe, and a tightly fitted door. In winter, when rivers and lakes were frozen, large blocks of ice were cut out and taken to the ice houses and covered with sawdust to stop them from melting quite so fast. The ice would often last well into the summer. Now, one day, a man working there lost quite a valuable watch, and while he was at work in the ice house, he searched high and low, carefully raking through the sawdust, but it couldn't be found. His fellow workers also looked, but they too were unsuccessful. Now, a young boy from the local community who'd heard about this fruitless search slipped quietly into the ice house during the lunch break, and in hardly any time at all, he came out with the watch. Amazed, the men asked him how he found it. He replied, I just closed the door, then I laid down on the sawdust and kept very still. In no time at all, I heard the watch ticking. The question is not if God is speaking, but whether we are quiet enough and still enough to hear his voice. God doesn't always speak to us as he did to Noah. He doesn't always come in a loud, thundering voice. You're reminded of the story of the prophet Elijah when he needed a word from God. God instructed him to go up onto the mountain. A violent whirlwind passed by, but the Lord wasn't in that whirlwind. Then there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. Then there was a fire, but the Lord wasn't present in the fire. In 1 Kings 19 we read, after the fire there was the sound of a gentle whisper. God spoke to Elijah, not in the violence of the whirlwind or the earthquake or the fire, but in the still, small voice of the whisper. I'm certain that God is still speaking to us today, just as he did in the days of Noah and Elijah. If we want to hear his voice, we need to slow down enough to hear what he is calling us to do, what he's saying to us. Only then will we learn how to make a difference in our world as our values become as his values. We can also make a difference when we live for God's purpose. What is your primary purpose in life? Do you enjoy those moments when people rush at you, taking your photo? We read in Genesis 6:9, Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless man living on the earth at that time. He consistently followed God's will and enjoyed a close relationship with him. After God had given Noah instructions about how to build the ark and who and what he was to bring on the boat, we read, Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. When it came time to load up the ark, God gave a number of details to Noah, and this is what we read in Genesis 7:5. Noah did exactly as the Lord had commanded him. And we read again a couple of verses later on, they came into the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. God is working in you, giving you the desire to obey him and the power to do what pleases him. Our purpose is to live in obedience to God and to honour and please him. How do we do that? Simply by following the instructions that he has given us. But then there is God's specific purpose that he has for you and me. God had a specific purpose for Noah. That was to build an ark and to fill it with his family and a selection of animals so that when the flood was over, they could repopulate the earth. Excuse me. That was a special purpose that God had for Noah. God has a specific purpose for each and every one of us. How do we know what that specific purpose is? There are a few ways to discover this. Listen for God's voice. What is God saying to you during your quiet time, during your time of prayer? Listen to that still, small voice and respond to it. Focus on ministering and caring and loving those people who are around you right now. There is no doubt that God has called us to love and minister within our family and our church settings. Begin there to fulfill God's calling upon your life. Work with what God has given you. You are who you are and where you are, as Esther was told by Mordecai, for such a time as this. When you know what God's purpose for your life is, you will begin to make a real life-changing difference in both your own lives, your own set of circumstances, and in the lives and circumstances of people around you. Begin to live for God, and your life will take on new meaning that you've never known before. And we can also make a difference when we love God, when we love him in worship. A new father spoke about his small infant daughter. When she began crawling, he said, "This is something I've really had trouble getting used to. I'll be in bed reading a book or watching television, and I look down at the foot of the bed, and there's little Isabella's face staring back at me. She's pulled herself up on the bed. Apparently, I've become one of the objects that fascinates her. It's so strange. After months of having to go to her, now she's choosing to come to me. I'll smile back at her, and in a few minutes she'll decide that she wants to go back into the living room, so off she'll crawl again. We're much like that little girl standing at the end of the bed, peeking over the top in awe of God. That's worship. I also think that it is probably how Noah felt when he finally got off the ark. In Genesis 8:20 and 21, we read, Noah built an altar to the Lord and sacrificed on it the animals and birds that had been approved for that purpose. And the Lord was pleased with that sacrifice. There's Noah building an altar, looking up in worship to God. This God who had chosen him out of all the people who lived on earth. This God who had instructed him with every minute single detail concerning what he wanted him to do. This God who had proven his love to Noah and his family. This God who had protected them in what had to be one of the scariest experiences that he had ever had. He just hadn't been in that spot before. No paparazzi here. Noah reached the end of this amazing journey, and he has no choice but to stop and take a peek over the top of the bed to look at God. The reason that we listen for God's voice and the reason that we want to live for God's purpose is that we love God and we want to express that love to him in worship. It is only in worship, whether it's at church, when we're able to meet, or via our computer during this time of pandemic, or even in our own quiet time of reflection, when it's just God and me, it's then that I realise that I can make a difference in this world. Because the one that I'm worshipping is here to guide, direct, and comfort me. I have no choice really but to get down on my knees and lift my hands toward heaven and offer myself as a living sacrifice before him today. I wonder, can you count on God today? Are you ready to make a difference for him in the kingdom, in our church, and in your family? I believe that when we're in a right relationship with God, then our own personal core values just fall into place. God doesn't usually come rushing at us like that paparazzi story that I told you, but he does come. He is here even now, if you'll just listen to his voice, or if you'll just begin to live for him, if you'll just acknowledge him in worship. He will show you how you can make a difference with his help. May God richly bless you as you seek to be his person in the place that he's called you to be right now. And look for great things that are yet to happen and yet to be. May God bless you in abundance.